And we are back for prepping for winter. Last time the Karstarks had breakfast with Stannis, and now Asha has arrived. My sister, Theon thought. My sweet sister. Though he had lost all feeling in his arms, he felt the twisting in his gut. The same as when that bloodless Braavosi banker presented him to Asha as a gift. The memory still rankled. The burly, balding knight who had been with her had wasted no time shouting for help, so they had no more than a few moments before Theon was dragged away to face the king. That was long enough. He had hated the look on Asha's face when she realized who he was, the shock in her eyes, the pity in her voice, the way her mouth twisted in disgust. Instead of rushing forward to embrace him, she had taken half a step backwards. "Did the bastard do this to you?" she had asked. "Don't call him that!" So the term sweet sister is an old and commonly used term going back to the early chapters of A Game of Thrones. Although there are a couple of occasions when the term is used genuinely, it's almost always used sarcastically between troubled siblings. Most notably, Viserys and Dany, Jaime, Tyrion and Cersei, Arya and Sansa, Lysa and Kat, and Theon and Asha. Keep in mind Theon, despite his brief emotional outpouring to Asha, is still likely on bad terms with her. He clearly did not like her pitying him. Additionally, Theon still likely blames Asha for not bringing him reinforcements at Winterfell, and he knows that she wants to rule the Iron Isles over him. It's important to note that Theon is likely completely unaware that he is valuable to Asha. Theon probably never learned about Torgon the Latecomer and the idea of invalidating a Kingsmoot, and if he did, it's a piece of history long forgotten. Interestingly, we once again hear about the bloodless nature of Tywin Astoris. We still have no idea what conversation happened between him and Theon that gave Theon such a bad impression of him. Did Theon try to bargain for his freedom on their 3-day ride together? Now I will say that Asha's reaction to Theon is likely not just pity, but also a lot of guilt and maybe some scheming. Asha is somewhat to blame for leaving Theon at Winterfell. Her taunts in many ways cemented him staying there. And let's remember that when Asha learned that Theon was being hacked up at the beginning of A Dance with Dragons, she actually wished him dead for mercy's sake. It's only when Tris Botley told her about Torgon the Latecomer that she became glad that Theon was alive to negate the Kingsmoot. So Asha is more than a bit conflicted. Then the words came spilling out of Theon in a rush. He tried to tell her all of it, about Reek and the Dreadfort, and Kira and the Keys, how Lord Ramsay never took anything but skin unless you begged for it. He told her how he'd saved the girl, leaped from the castle wall into the snow. "We flew! Let Abel make a song of that! We flew!" Then he had to say who Abel was, and talked about the washerwomen, who weren't truly washerwomen. By then Theon knew how strange and incoherent all of this sounded, yet somehow the words would not stop. He was cold and sick and tired and weak, so very weak. She has to understand, she is my sister. He never wanted to do any harm to Bran or Rickon. Reek made him kill those boys. Not him, Reek, but the other one. "I am no kinslayer," he insisted. He told her how he bedded down with Ramsay's bitches, warned her that Winterfell was full of ghosts. "The swords were gone. 4, I think. Or 5. I don't recall. The Stone Kings are angry." He was shaking by then, trembling like an autumn leaf. "The Heart Tree knew my name. The old gods. Theon, I heard them whisper. There was no wind, but the leaves were moving. Theon, they said. My name is Theon." It was good to say the name. The more he said it, the less like he was to forget. "You have to know your name," he told his sister. You told me you were Eskred, but that was a lie. Your name is Asha." So here we have Theon telling a long story of everything that's happened to him so far. And this scene is a clear parallel to Sam talking to Sorella Sand. In both situations, we have two men who have long, panicked, horrible stories that they're telling to two patient, listening women. And in both situations, our author talks about their stories spilling out of them. The parallels between the two stories are actually pretty neat. Sam's story begins talking about Stannis, while Theon's story begins talking about Ramsay. And then both stories start talking about Mance Rayder. And then the stories start pouring out of both of them. Sam starts talking about his adventures north of the Wall, while Theon starts speaking of being cold and tired. This is, of course, what Sam mostly thought about while he was north of the Wall. Then Theon starts talking about Bran, while Sam specifically thinks about holding back information about Bran. Theon's conversation then starts talking about werewoods, while Sam's heads towards dragons. The conversation ends with Theon remembering Asha's deception as Eskred, while Sam stares at Sorella posing as Eleros. It is important to note that the Dreadfort is mentioned once again, this time with consideration of Theon's attempted escape. Keep in mind, it's during this escape that Theon learns about an unguarded gate that would be advantageous for an attack. Stannis initially wanted to take the Dreadfort in A Dance with Dragons, and really to win the North, he still needs to take the Dreadfort. The importance of Theon is once again highlighted. I will say there's quite a bit of ambiguity in what Theon tells Asha. Did Theon know Abel was Mance? And if he did he pass that information to Asha? Did Theon's words betray the identity of Jane? I doubt Theon would have done this intentionally, but calling her the girl cannot be good. And did Theon tell Asha that Bran and Rickon were alive? Or did he at least supply enough information that Asha could figure it out? We should remember that Tycho Nestoris was standing right there and would have likely passed any information to Stannis. At this point, there are so many ways that Stannis could discover that Bran and Rickon are alive that I would be pretty surprised if he doesn't know. Anyway, again Theon protests that he's not a kinslayer, which again points to the idea that he fears that he killed his own son with the Miller's boys. It is, his sister had said, so softly that he was afraid she might cry. Theon hated that. He hated women weeping. Jane Poole had wept all the way from Winterfell to here, wept until her face was purple as a beetroot, and the tears had frozen on her cheeks. And all because he told her that she must be Arya, or else the wolves might send them back. "They trained you at a brothel," he reminded her, whispering in her ear so the others would not hear. "Jane is the next thing to a whore. You must go on being Arya." He meant no hurt to her. It was for her own good. And his. She has to remember her name. When the tip of her nose turned black from frostbite, and one of the riders from the Night's Watch told her she might lose a piece of it, Jane had wept over that as well. "No one will care what Arya looks like, so long as she is the heir to Winterfell," he assured her. 100 men will want to marry her. 1,000. The memory left Theon writhing in his chains. So we find out that Theon had somewhat cruelly told Jane that her real identity is worthless, and she must continue on as Arya essentially forever. Theon also admits he is doing this for his own self-preservation, hoping that it will endear him in the eyes of Stannis. And Theon is clearly feeling guilty about all of this. And if you actually think about it, Theon's actions were only for his self-preservation in the short run. There is no way that Jane Poole could have continued on as Arya forever. Not with a Stannis victory. After all, Jon Snow would eventually want to see his sister and find out the truth. And barring that, eventually one of the captives at the Dreadfort would be released and would see the truth as well. The insane short-sightedness of the Jane-Arya swap really makes one wonder about what Tywin and Littlefinger were thinking in arranging the thing in the first place. I suppose both of them wanted to be able to invalidate the Boltons' claim later on for Sansa. But then what was Roose Bolton thinking? And he did know that Arya was a fake. Why else use Theon in the wedding? I suppose he was just worrying about short-term control so he could consolidate power? With all Jane's crying, though, I do wonder if Tycho Nestoris figured out her identity. And let's remember that Wyman Manderley had met Arya, and Mance Rayder had seen her during his trip to Winterfell in A Game of Thrones, and Crowsfoot Umber seemed awfully suspicious of Jane's identity with his questions about Mikken and Gage. Not to mention, Tycho Nestoris had Night's Watch guides with him that knew the way to Winterfell, meaning they've been that way before and may have seen Arya. And they certainly got a good look at Jane's face when examining her frostbite. There's again so many ways that Stannis could find out that Jane is a fake that I would be very surprised if Stannis didn't know. And Stannis did get her out of the village pretty quickly. The Hill clan supposedly supported Stannis in order to rescue Ned's girl. They may be less willing to fight, knowing that Arya is a fake. "Let me down," he pleaded. "Just for a little while, then you can hang me up again." Stannis looked at him, but did not answer. "Tree!" a raven cried. "Tree! Tree! Tree!" The other bird said, "Theon!" clear as day, as Asha came striding through the door. So this is the second time that the ravens have called out, "Tree, tree, tree." No one has yet spoken the word tree in this chapter, so the birds aren't mimicking. They are almost certainly skin-changed, likely by Bran and Bloodraven. Now perhaps they're yelling tree because the two live in a tree, or perhaps they're mentioning the tree because it's the best way to communicate with them. However, the first time the ravens mention the tree is after Theon and Stannis talk about higher ground. If Stannis' forces were on that island with the tree, and the Frey forces were heading at them, They would have the higher ground. The Frey forces would fall through the ice and would have to climb up to the shores of the island to get out. This time the ravens say it after Theon begs to be brought down and perhaps be put back up. There is an obvious play on words here with "you can hang me up again." To hang is to put up, but to hang is also to execute. And obviously people are often hanged in trees, which is probably what the ravens are getting at, heart trees being a place of religious sacrifice. Our author has already made this hung-hanged joke earlier when Gatehouse Amy misspeaks and says that her father was hung. Hanged, her mother corrects. Your father wasn't a tapestry. It should be noted that Theon is in fact being hung like a tapestry for visitors to look upon, whether it be Maester Tybald or the Karstarks or Asha. And Theon played his role perfectly for Tybald and Karstark. He outed them as enemies, put fear in their hearts, and apparently turned them into Stannis' creatures. Displaying Theon had a function, and we shall see if that function works for a third time. Carl the maid was with her, and Christopher Botley. Theon had known Botley since they were boys together back on Pike. Why has she brought her pets? Does she mean to cut me free? They would end the same way as the Karstarks if she tried. The king was displeased by their presence as well. "Your guards may wait without. If I meant harm to you, 2 men would not dissuade me." The Ironborn bowed and retreated. So it is somewhat curious that Carl and Triss were brought only to leave immediately, and even Theon asks why they were brought. Of course, the even bigger mystery is why Carl, Triss, and the other Ironborn were released from Deepwood Motte. Lady Glover is obsessed with getting her children back from the Ironborn. Why on earth give up Triss Botley, a possible hostage for a swap? And why on earth would the Ironborn be now loyal enough to fight for Stannis? It seems likely that Tycho Nestoris brokered some sort of agreement involving the Glover hostages and an alliance with the Ironborn. In fact, I suspect Wex and Dagmar Cleftjaw are involved. But of course, a release of hostages wouldn't even be possible unless the Kingsmoot were nullified, which requires Theon. So let's assume that Triss and Carl told Asha all of this. Bringing Triss and Carl would then signal to Stannis that Asha knows all of this. And Stannis hanging Theon on the wall for Asha signals that Stannis knows that Asha wants to nullify the Kingsmoot. It's a statement to Asha telling her that he holds all of the cards. Or does he? Asha took a knee. "Your Grace, must my brother be chained like that? It seems a poor reward for bringing you the Stark girl." The king's mouth twitched. "You have a bold tongue, my lady, not unlike your turncloak brother." "Thank you, your grace." "It was not a compliment." Stannis gave Theon a long look. "The village lacks a dungeon, and I have more prisoners than I anticipated when we halted here." He waved Asha to her feet. "You may rise." So Asha begins by criticizing Stannis' treatment of Theon after he brought the Stark girl. This makes Stannis' mouth twitch, and he then calls Asha bold. But of course, on its face, that really wasn't that bold of a statement, at least not one warranting Stannis losing his cool. That is, unless the Stark girl was said sarcastically, as if Asha knows the girl is a fake. Let's keep in mind that Theon had told his long story, of which we don't really know the details, and Triss and Carl were on a 3-day ride with Jane Poole as well, and may have figured out that she was a fake. Not to mention, Theon brought up the Asha Eskred incident. It may be that Asha is bold because she was threatening Stannis. Asha does have another bargaining chip, knowledge that Arya is a fake, which can turn the Northmen against Stannis. Now let's assume for a moment that Asha's statement was in fact a threat. What does Stannis do in return? He mentions that Theon is a prisoner. Theon, her brother, Dagmar Cleftjaw's de facto son, the key to the Iron Isles, and the nullification of the Kingsmoot. So what we should see is a bit of bargaining between these two. I can't help but note how similar this is to Val visiting Stannis in A Dance with Dragons and wanting him to spare Mance. She stood. "The Braavosi ransomed 7 of my men from Lady Glover. I would gladly pay a ransom for my brother." "There is not enough gold on all your Iron Isles. Your brother's hands are soaked with blood. Faring is urging me to give him to R'hllor." "Clayton Suggs as well, I do not doubt." "Him, Corlys Penny, all the rest, even Sir Richard here, who only loves the Lord of Light when it suits his purposes." So Asha starts out by mentioning the suspicious ransoming of the 7 Ironborn. Again, this is odd as Lady Glover clearly wants her children back. Now, there were in fact 9 Ironborn who survived the Battle of Deepwood Motte. 1 supposedly died, a man named Crom, and 6 made it to the Crofters' village with Tycho Nestoris. The missing 9th might be the naked redhead daughter of Hagen. But we have to leave open the possibility that another Ironborn is out there, perhaps a go-between heading to Torrhen's Square to talk to Dagmar Cleftjaw. Now Stannis refuses Asha's offer of a ransom and says everyone wants Theon executed. Of course, over and over and over in this chapter we've talked about how valuable Theon is. Killing Theon would simply be idiotic. Additionally, if Stannis were really set on executing Theon, why even talk to Asha in the first place? Clearly she has something that Stannis wants. Why else meet her? Another tell that Theon isn't going to be executed is that Stannis claims it's the desire of Richard Horp. Now, Faring, Suggs, and Penny are all true believers, so of course they would want to sacrifice. But why would Richard Horp? Politically speaking, it's simply a dumb move, and Richard Horp knows as well as anyone that burning people would piss off the Northerners, who believe that a R'hllor-focused sacrifice offends the old gods. Considering the Northern forces are healthier while the Southern forces are on death's doorstep, it seems like the Northerners' opinion is more important. Of course, a burning would be necessary if one is trying to do a body swap. One needs the body to be unrecognizable. And if one needs a fake light to lure the Freys onto a lake, a burning pyre might do. The Red God's choir only knows a single song. So long as that song is pleasing in God's ears, let them sing. Lord Bolton's men will be here sooner than we would wish. Only Moore's Umber stands between us, and your brother tells me his levies are made up entirely of green boys. Men like to know their God is with them when they go to battle. Not all your men worship the same God. I am aware of this. I am not the fool my brother was. So here Stannis continues on with his weak reasoning for needing to execute Theon. The battle is near, and the men need a morale boost. As if Stannis ever cared about troop morale. But let's explore morale for a second. The Queen's men just got a sacrifice, while the Northerners would be offended by Theon being burned in front of their heart tree. Stannis would actually be looking at a net morale loss. Asha even points out that the Northerners aren't R'hllor worshippers, which Stannis says he knows. Okay then, why the burning? Asha seems to know something is up. Theon is my mother's last surviving son. When his brothers died, it shattered her. His death will crush what remains of her. But I have not come to beg for his life. Wise! I am sorry for your mother, but I do not spare the lives of turncloaks. This one especially. He slew 2 sons of Eddard Stark. Every Northman in my service would abandon me if I showed him any clemency. Your brother must die. So, seemingly out of nowhere, Asha brings up her mom, and Stannis is weirdly somewhat apologetic for hurting Asha's mom's feelings. It should be noted that Stannis drops the whole R'hllor sacrifice argument, but holds to the idea that there needs to be an execution. Of course, Asha's mom is not just some random aside. Asha's mom holds the Glover hostages. That's why Asha's bringing her up. Now you may think, is House Glover really that essential? Well, yes. Robert Glover may have Rickon in his possession, so they are pretty darn important. Once again, it seems that Asha is threatening Stannis. Now, it is a bit odd that there is conflict here. Stannis has Theon, the Ironborn have Torrhen's Square and the Glover hostages. It seems like a mutually beneficial trade could go on. In fact, a deal may have already been reached with Dagmar Cleftjaw and Tris Botley. But oddly, we see Asha threatening to bring the whole thing down by perhaps revealing that Arya is a fake and refusing to give up the Glover hostages. What on earth is Asha's game? And then comes the big surprise. Then do the deed yourself, your grace. The chill in Asha's voice made Theon shiver in his chains. Take him out across the lake to the islet where the weirwood grows, and strike his head off with that sorcerous sword you bear. That is how Eddard Stark would have done it. Theon slew Lord Eddard's sons, give him to Lord Eddard's gods. The old gods of the north. Give him to the tree. So in a twist, Asha goes against all of her personal best interests and agrees to Theon's execution. So Asha doesn't want to bring down Stannis' plan after all. She just wants to improve it. It seems that Asha absolutely knows that Theon isn't going to be executed. Keep in mind, Stannis' plan seemed to be to burn Theon and possibly swap him out, which would cause light to lure the Freys, but would piss off the Northerners, especially if done right in front of their heart tree. Asha's new plan is objectively better. Stannis now has good reason to go to that tree. It's a heart tree sacrifice, which would make the stronger, more important Northerners happy. And Stannis can pull out Lightbringer to make the light to lure the Freys. The blinding light of Lightbringer might actually even be better to swap out Theon. In this short exchange, Asha showed Stannis that she is intelligent and a team player. She figured out what Stannis was up to, and improved upon it. And suddenly there came a wild thumping as the maester's ravens hopped and flapped inside their cages, their black feathers flying as they beat against the bars with loud and raucous caws.
"The tree!"
One squawked.
"The tree! The tree!"
Whilst the second screamed only,
"Theon! Theon! Theon!"
Theon Greyjoy smiled. They know my name, he thought. So Bran and Bloodraven seem quite excited about this sacrifice. We aren't quite sure if they're happy or upset about this, or if perhaps one is upset while the other is happy. Why Bran tried to contact Theon in A Dance with Dragons is still a big unknown. And that is the end of the Theon chapter. So what did we learn? Well, we have this insanely rich situation going on with a lot of moving parts. We have the ill-suited Justin Massey heading to the Wall on a seemingly impossible quest to get more sellswords, and he will soon face a rumor that Stannis is dead. And he's with Alysanne Mormont, who is in this story for some sort of mysterious reason. Is she a hostage? Is she related to someone like Tormund? Is there a trade happening? And Jane Poole is along, and we don't know how many people know she's fake. Will Jon even be alive to out her? Not to mention Tycho Nestoris. How much does he know? Is the Stannis agreement even legitimate? What arrangements did he make in White Harbor and Deepwood Motte? And then we have the Ironborn sphere. What does Stannis even want with Asha? Why were Triss and Qarl released? Will Theon negate the Kingsmoot? Will the Glover hostages be released? Will Dagmar Cleftjaw be brought into the fold? Incoming, we have Freys, Manderlys, and apparently Ramsay. Will they crush Mor's Umber? Will the Manderlys turn? Can Stannis defeat them? In the village, we have a sacrifice coming. Will Theon really die? Will Arnulf Karstark be swapped in? Will the Hill clans be wroth? Will the Queen's men be wroth? Will the events unfold as Asha said, with Lightbringer being brought out? Will Stannis have the higher ground, and will people fall through the ice? We have some potential tools for the future. Will Arthur Karstark be Stannis' man? Will Maester Tybalt be writing misleading letters? And what about Stannis' next targets? How will he get into Winterfell? Using Bolton's strategy against them? Will the Karstarks be involved? Will the Manderlys be involved? Will Frey clothing be involved? Will Horsebane Umber on the inside be involved? And what about the Dreadfort? It contains a massive amount of food and represents true victory over the North. Will Theon's knowledge of the unguarded gate be useful? Who will lead the assault? Asha's Ironborn? Dagmar's Ironborn? The Karstarks? And finally, what the hell are Bran and Bloodraven doing? Whatever the case, it's going to be fun. And that's all for the Theon sample chapter. I had my Patreon supporters vote, and so the next chapter we're going to tackle is The Forsaken. But before that, we will talk about the Asha fragment. See you next time for Prepping for Winter.